I didn't wake up at 24 with my life falling apart. Nothing collapsed. Nothing dramatic happened. On paper, everything looked fine. I was doing what I was supposed to do. Moving forward. Being responsible. Handling life the way adults are expected to. But somewhere in the middle of an ordinary day, a thought appeared, not loudly, not urgently, just clearly. Something was wrong. Not in a way I could explain. Not in a way that showed up on the outside. Just a feeling that the life I was living didn't fully belong to me. The days were starting to repeat. The goals didn't excite me the way they used to. I wasn't struggling, but I wasn't moving toward anything that felt real either. That was the unsettling part. I hadn't failed. I hadn't fallen behind. I had followed the path correctly, and still felt disconnected from my own life. And once that realization settled in, it was impossible to ignore. At 24, there was nothing obvious to fix. I wasn't in crisis. I wasn't lost in the way people usually mean it. There was no single mistake I could point to and say, that's where things went wrong. From the outside, my life looked acceptable, even successful by ordinary standards. I was moving forward. I had responsibilities. I was doing what people expect you to do when you're trying to build a life. Friends and family would probably say I was on track. That's what made the realization so confusing. Because when something is clearly broken, at least you know what to work on. But when everything looks fine and still feels off, there's nowhere obvious to start. I wasn't unhappy, just disconnected. The routine was there. The structure was there. The sense of forward motion was there. But excitement was missing. Direction felt vague. Purpose felt assumed rather than chosen. I was living inside a life that made sense logically, but not emotionally. And the more I tried to reassure myself with facts, stability, progress, responsibility, the more obvious the gap became. This wasn't about wanting more money, more status, or more approval. It was about realizing that I had been building a life that worked, without ever asking whether it actually fit me. That's the danger of doing everything right. You can follow the instructions perfectly and still end up somewhere you never consciously chose. And once you notice that, it's hard to pretend you haven't. The realization didn't arrive during a crisis. It came during repetition. Days began to feel identical. Not difficult, just predictable. Wake up, handle responsibilities, move through the routine, rest, repeat. At first, I told myself this was normal, that this was what stability looked like. That excitement naturally fades once real life begins. But the feeling didn't go away. It sharpened. I noticed that goals no longer pulled me forward. They sat there, waiting to be completed, but without urgency or meaning. Achievements felt smaller the moment they were reached. The satisfaction didn't last. And then the question appeared. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a quiet thought that returned more often than I liked. Is this what the rest of my life is supposed to look like? That question was unsettling because it didn't come from failure. It came from consistency. From doing the same things correctly over and realizing they weren't leading anywhere I actually cared about. I wasn't running away from responsibility. I wasn't afraid of effort. I was afraid of drifting through life without intention. That's when I understood that the problem wasn't discipline. It was direction. And once you see the difference, it's hard to ignore it. Because discipline can keep you moving. But only direction tells you why. Looking back, I realized it wasn't the age itself that mattered. It was what had changed around it. By 24, the constant transitions had slowed down. School was behind me. The pressure of figuring things out had softened. I wasn't scrambling anymore. For the first time, life was stable enough to be examined. And that's when the discomfort appeared. When you're busy surviving, you don't have time to question direction. You focus on getting through the next phase. But once survival settles into routine, space opens up, and space invites reflection. At 24, I finally had that space. I could see my life more clearly, without the noise of urgency or crisis. And what I saw wasn't chaos, it was misalignment. The life I was building wasn't wrong. It just wasn't intentional. I had been moving forward on autopilot, guided more by expectations than by choice. And until that moment, I didn't realize how much of my direction had been inherited rather than decided. That's why the realization felt unsettling. Not because something had failed, but because nothing had been questioned before. At 24, the awareness arrived not as panic, but as honesty. And once that honesty showed up, it demanded attention. Not to destroy what I had built, but to finally understand it. That realization wasn't a breakdown. It was the beginning of clarity. Realizing something was wrong with my life at 24 didn't mean I was broken. It meant I had reached a point where following the path was no longer enough. The structure was there. The discipline was there. But direction had to become conscious. That realization wasn't a failure, it was a signal. A sign that life had moved from survival to choice. Many people don't reach this moment until much later. Some never stop long enough to notice it at all. Feeling unsettled isn't a weakness. It's awareness. And awareness doesn't demand immediate answers. It simply asks that you stop living on autopilot and start listening to what your life is quietly telling you. That's where real change begins.